As some of you may know, I once did a batch review of a humble choice about 4 years ago, which isn't that good of a video anymore, but I do like the concept, and since I've got a bunch of free time on my hands this month, I thought, why not try something like that again? So in this video, I'll give you a general overview and more of a first impression than an in-depth review of every game available in the humble choice for the month of May of 2024, which obviously should still be available to get when this video goes live, else what's the point, right? I won't go over the entire history of humble choice and stuff like I did last time, but to quickly recap, Humble Choice is a monthly subscription service from Humble Bundle, which itself is an online game distribution platform with a focus on charity. You buy a game there, get a Steam key, and a percentage of the sale goes to a charity, without the game actually costing more for you. Pretty good deal, right? In fact, if you're subscribed to the Humble Choice, you even get a general discount on most titles, from 10 to 20% depending on how long you've been subscribed and the games themselves. I've been a subscriber for a long time, and it's been my main source of Steam keys for a while at this point. The games in these Humble Choice bundles can vary wildly, however, though usually there's at least one blockbuster title present to draw people in, so to speak, and usually a bunch of lesser known indie titles with some actual real gems present there from time to time as well. This month's lineup includes Yakuza Like a Dragon, the JRPG spin-off title of the Yakuza franchise, which performed very well both in sales and reception. Hi-Fi Rush, a rhythm combat brawler which had been very warmly received, though its dev studio has since been unceremoniously shut down by Microsoft just at the start of the month, the exact day this bundle released in fact, tragically. These two games are the headliners I feel, with the rest being the more niche and lesser known indie games. These are Steelrising, a clockwork punk Souls-like in revolutionary Paris, Loddlenaut, a laid-back ocean-cleaning comfy type game, Amanda the Adventurer, one of those unnerving friendly-looking thriller horror games, Mediterrenea Inferno, a surreal visual novel, Bravery and Greed, a co-op-focused dungeon brawler, and lastly King of the Castle, a medieval-themed party game. Seeing as I have no friends, I won't be taking a look at King of the Castle, as it is an actual party game to play in a group like you can't play it solo, kinda like the Jackbox Party Pack or whatever, and Bravery and Greed will also be looked at purely through a single player lens because of that, just as a disclaimer. I'll go over each game in the order I just mentioned them, and I will of course put timestamps on the video so you can skip around to whichever game interests you the most. These will be mainly first impressions and stuff like that, no in-depth reviews like I mentioned, just to give you an overview of the games themselves so you can get an idea as to whether you will like them enough to pick up the bundle for yourself, for which you can use my referral link in the description if you want to. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the choices in this month's Humble Choice. First up, Yakuza Like a Dragon, the biggest title in the bundle, as well as the biggest game itself. Yakuza Like a Dragon is a spin-off title of the well-known Japanese Yakuza and karaoke simulator game series, Yakuza. Departing from its established beat-em-up combat, Like a Dragon instead has you fighting with turn-based combat like a JRPG. This inspiration is also explicitly stated by the characters in-game, with the protagonist, Ichiban Kasuga, essentially role-playing as, or deluding himself into, being the hero in a Dragon Quest game. This goes up to the point of hallucinating enemies, transforming into more fantasy-like enemies and stuff, and I think this is pretty hilarious, and the whole game as a whole has this goofy side to it, and especially to its side content, which is then contrasted very heavily with the main story being actually quite gritty for the most part. The first 2 to 3 chapters of the game function more as an extended prologue and tutorial, with you meeting and learning about a lot of characters, their motivations, their backstories and stuff, with Ichiban then essentially traveling into the future by spending 18 years in jail. The world he comes back to is one he doesn't really recognize, and he eventually falls down to absolute rock bottom and ends up homeless for a short while. Ichiban as a character is pretty fun, since he's in quite stark contrast to the stoic Kiryu, being a lot more childish in comparison, which makes sense as he had a pretty rough childhood and a pretty rough life up to this point. No wonder so many people call this game Schizophrenia Simulator, in a good way, of course. Like in true Yakuza fashion, the game is absolutely flush with side content, having a ton of minigames and side quests and other stuff to do when you're tired of the main story, with it all being fairly ridiculous due to the I'm the hero type deal with Ichiban. I will say that the game takes a while to get going. Like I said, the first few chapters are mainly just setup, with a little bit of freedom to look around and some combat here and there to spice things up. But for me, it took about 6 hours to actually get to the point where the game feels like it opens up, which is right after the point you have a full party of 3 members at the start of chapter 4. This is fine, by the way, and I assume that all of this setup will have a great payoff towards the end of the story, but if you don't have too much patience, or not that much free time, it could become boring or frustrating to get through the intro to get to the meat of the game, without skipping all or most of the story, at which point the whole story as a whole will just become a little bit of a jumbled mess, with you missing key plot points. If you've played a Yakuza game before, I'm sure you'll feel right at home with this one, with the main difference of course being the JRPG combat replacing the beat-em-up combat, as well as Ichiban replacing Kiryu as the main character. The game definitely has a good amount of charm to it, can be very funny, and the combat actually feels quite refreshing for me, not having played too many JRPGs myself, though the combat itself seems to rely a little bit on positioning, which I think comes from the beat-em-up combat in the other Yakuza games, without you having the freedom to actually position yourself towards your enemies. So it's a little bit iffy sometimes, the combat itself, but from what I have seen from Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, which is essentially a sequel to this game, it seems like that the combat and the positioning there is a lot better and more refined than this one. It's not a deal breaker or anything, but having attacks that deal AoE damage with the enemies all shuffling around without them actually, staying in a group can be a little bit annoying sometimes. For what I've played so far, which is about 9 hours, the game is definitely worth picking up the humble choice for as a whole, and I'll be sure to continue playing this one after this video has been done, either before or after playing the other Yakuza games, which I've been planning to get to anyways, only having played a little bit of Yakuza 0. So I would say this game is definitely a positive here and might be a good place to get into the Yakuza series as a whole if you haven't yet. It gets a green check mark for sure. Moving on, Hi-Fi Rush is a rhythm game paired with combat sections and platforming and exploration parts. It's somewhat reminiscent of older games like Ratchet and Clank, those silly games of the PlayStation 2 era. The story is goofy, the humor is silly, the world is whimsical. I would almost say that it's one of those games that can have you feeling like a kid again. I absolutely love rhythm games, with some of my favorite childhood games being the Patapon series, which sees you commanding an army with 4 drum beats to give orders. I don't necessarily have an ear for music or any deeper knowledge or anything like that, but I find rhythm games inherently enjoyable. The same goes for Hi-Fi Rush, with it combining that rhythm gaming with action combat, not too dissimilar to something like Metal Hellsinger or Crypt of the Necrodancer. The setup is actually quite simple. Main character and wannabe rockstar Chai signs up for some megacorp cyberpunk style type augmentation. Through happenstance, his iPod gets fused with his heart or something, and now the entire world beats to the music he has playing. This means both your actions and your enemy's actions are synced to the beat. It's this simple setup that carries the entire gameplay loop, and it's a lot of fun. Depending on how comfortable you are playing rhythm and action games, this can feel like second nature to you, or might take a lot of getting used to. Thankfully, the game provides a lot of assistance in the way of showing you the beats you need to hit as well as having an auto action mode, which makes it so you just have to hit one button on the beat, so you don't have to think about combos or dodging or parrying, and you can just focus on that rhythm aspect. This means that the game can essentially be played by literally anyone. The visuals here are great, with a cartoony animation, comic book cel-shaded look to everything, and some cutscenes having these low frame rates while others having a higher frame rate, with some comic book poses and everything, really gives it an authentic animation feel, while the gameplay is very smooth since it's all synced to the beat. This of course gets all tied together beautifully with the soundtrack, with some actual amazing licensed tracks for the boss fights. In general, the game is just very fun and exciting to play. Just the first level is a lot of fun, with the first boss also being quite challenging. I started playing the game on very hard and got an A rank for the first level my first time through, so the game clicked almost instantly for me, though it does ramp up the difficulty quite harshly. As the game progresses, you can buy new attack combos, special attacks, get a partner to assist you in battle, and just improve your arsenal over time. The game also keeps throwing in new enemies, new enemy types and mechanics at you regularly, both in combat and in exploration, and I'm sure that there's a lot I haven't even seen yet, like those fire and numbered doors and whatnot. The cool thing is, the game can be as challenging as you want, with tight beat timings necessary and enemies hitting hard when they do hit you, or it can be as easy as you want by making beat timings more forgiving or playing it on auto action mode. There's a bunch of accessibility settings, so don't worry about whether or not you can enjoy the game if you suck at either rhythm or action games. Story-wise, it goes in the direction of Down with the Evil Robot Corporation, with you aiding a growing cast of rebel characters. It might not be or do anything groundbreaking here just yet in terms of the narrative, but the characters as a whole, as well as the villains and stuff, are all nice and funny and cute. And especially the robot cat is very cute. Cute Robot Cat, the video game. All in all, it's a genuinely cool game with quite unique gameplay to it. Stringing combos along to the beat, dodging and parrying attacks, and then beat hitting some robots into the stratosphere will take a long time to get old for me, especially with you steadily unlocking new combos and stuff to play around with, all to a banger soundtrack. The boss fights especially take that gameplay formula to its crescendo, with them also featuring some amazing licensed tracks like I mentioned before. The game itself was released very positively and feels like it has everything you would expect from a fun little gem of a game like this, but apparently, sadly, it didn't make the money that was expected from it by its publisher. Even though the game got its praise and got its awards, this might be why the studio as a whole has now been shut down by Microsoft. But even then, it's still pretty tragic, since I feel it is one of those indie-like games that really show what gaming is all about. A cool video game being fun to play. Picking up the humble choice just for this game is definitely worth it. A real must-play if you actually enjoy playing video games for fun. I'm definitely going to be finishing this one and will try to 100% it down the line as well. Another green check mark on the board here. We're now 2 for 2 so far, so let's continue on to Steelrising. Steelrising, which is one word by the way, is a Parisian clockwork punk Souls-like, where you play as an automaton following the orders of Marie Antoinette during the start of the French Revolution in an alternate timeline, where Louis XVI has a veritable army of clockwork soldiers at his command for some reason, powered by something called anima. This is one of those games that gets as Souls-like as it gets, complete with not quite souls, not quite bonfires, not quite Estus flasks, not quite life gems, the whole shebang. We all know how Dark Souls plays, so I'll tell you what it does uniquely different instead. These are found largely in the combat aspect, with weapons and stamina management. Weapons are of course just that, each with their own abilities. Some abilities are just a block, as you have no secondary hand slot to put a shield in or anything, while other abilities are more unique, like a halberd firing a grenade or a fire chain that sets itself on fire to deal fire damage. These weapon abilities do feel similar to the weapon arts in Elden Ring in general, though Steelrising having released half a year after Elden Ring makes me think most of these concepts were developed on their own because it's too small of a gap to really copy what Elden Ring has done, I think. The same goes with the more vertical aspect to the exploration, which was also present in Elden Ring, as you can jump around and climb on ledges, though it's not amazingly clear what is jumpable and climbable all of the time. Those more unique offensive weapon abilities do cost a finite resource, by the way, called alchemical vials. This means you can't exactly spam them in combat, though it's a resource that most enemies drop regularly, which makes it quite similar to spirit emblems in Sekiro, for example. Stamina management is also done in quite a unique way, allowing you to burn through it completely, and then having the ability to press a button at the right moment to regain all or part of your stamina bar, at the cost of some freeze buildup. You can keep doing this as much as you want, though if you mess up the timing, you'll have no stamina for a longer time, and if your freeze buildup maxes out, you'll be frozen in place until you press enough buttons to break free. In the hands of a skillful player, this allows for a lot of freedom in stamina management, and brings a whole other level to the skill ceiling of this game, though I would have liked it more if it didn't mean having to look at the bottom left of the screen every time, and instead having the stamina bar a bit more centered, perhaps. When it comes to Souls-likes like this, the thing they do differently from the Soulsborne titles are always the most interesting part in my opinion, but these can be both positive or negative. The negative parts the game does differently lie largely in the design and technical spaces here. Technically, the game just feels a bit rough around the edges. The timing to continue an attack combo fell off. The textures of the floor in the entire first area didn't load for me properly. The loading screens themselves are very long on a hard drive, like actual minutes, so I would suggest an SSD at the least, stuff like that. The performance in general didn't feel great, and my PC never had to worry this hard for a game like Elden Ring, for example. Design-wise, the maps themselves aren't that interesting at the start. They could evolve into more interesting stuff later down the line, but I wouldn't know that yet. The levels as a whole seem cluttered with too much beautification, if that makes sense, which is in line with the setting of the game, I suppose, but in a Souls-like, map and level design has to be done very deliberately, and if I can't find my way around because every alley looks the same, that is a design problem, since it's not an issue I have with other Soulsborne games. It's a lot of fun getting lost, but it's not a lot of fun being lost, if that makes sense, even though you do get a compass, which you can use to give you a marker telling you where to go for which quests, which you can use if you are truly lost. All enemies so far have been of the mechanical variety, and the issue there is that it gets repetitive. There's enough variety within those mechanical enemies in what they can do and what they look like though, with some very cool designs, but hitting them with the equivalent of a mace, and them not budging at all, makes it feel like you're fighting an army of those stone miner guys in the Elden Ring caves. Charged heavy attacks knock them down just fine most of the time, but in general, attacks feel lacking in impact, especially comparing it to either like a dragon or Hi-Fi Rush. Especially Hi-Fi Rush. Slower weapons feel like shit to use here, because enemies can just attack you before you even have the chance to dodge away after your attack animation has finished, and I'm fairly sure the dodge step you get here has no or very little invincibility frames, requiring you to play it very safe most of the time, which just makes it less fun to play in general. As a whole, I'm fairly mixed on Steelrising. It has its pros and cons, but from my short experience playing it for a few hours, it's leaning more towards cons in general. The game just doesn't feel quite right. Movement can be a bit annoying. Enemies are hard to read and barely react to attacks. The music has been quite generic so far. Enemy designs start blending into each other. Level design isn't that interesting. The story is there, I guess. Boss fights are mid. Something in the game makes me nauseous, and I think it is the way the camera just stops moving suddenly. But in general, after the few play sessions I did, it didn't leave me with a positive feeling and made me want to go back to play more Yakuza or Hi-Fi Rush instead. And therefore, I'd mark this as the first red cross on the board, though I'm sure you'll find enough to enjoy here if you're a diehard Souls-like fanatic. It's not a game I would recommend as is anyways, certainly not for $50 base price, so getting it cheap as a bonus in this humble choice is a decently good deal, I guess. Moving on, Loddlenaut is a cute little game about cleaning up the ocean on an alien world which has been left polluted by some random megacorporation. Despite that description, the game is actually quite comfy, with the focus being the Loddles, cute little axolotl type creatures you encounter here and whose home it is you are saving. You can have these cute little guys follow you around, feed them their favorite food, watch them evolve into new variants, and just watch them grow and prosper in general. The cleaning up part here is fairly simple. Just blast away the goop and collect the trash with your bubble gun. The trash you collect you can recycle into usable materials to buy upgrades and structures to make your life easier in general, making you actively want to collect trash thanks to this gameplay loop, with trash bags actually becoming something like a treasure chest over time. The game as a whole is short and sweet, taking me about 3 hours to finish up completely, with some achievements left open, which I'll likely get to one of these days. Story-wise, it's very simple. Some corporation was here, they did some experiments, didn't work out, refinery blew up, campus sank into the ocean, they packed up and left with you having to clean up after their shit. Funnily enough, the guy talking to you never really shits too hard on them or whatever. He's more so disappointed and concerned for the wildlife instead of calling for a communist revolution or whatever, which is relatively refreshing when it comes to a setting like this, I suppose. For a cute little game about ocean pollution cleanup and petting Loddles, it was more fun than I initially anticipated, though the actual goop maxing can be a little bit iffy sometimes if you're not level enough with the goop to clean it, but aside from that, this little game is perfectly fun and is nice to play on a laid-back afternoon or evening thanks to the chill gameplay, visuals and music. I wouldn't pick up the choice entirely just for this, but it is a nice little bonus if you're a fan of these laid-back games like Power Wash Simulator or something, and this will also get a little check mark on the board. A little bit smaller than the others, I guess, but still a check mark nonetheless. Amanda the Adventurer is one of those childlike horror games where the main scary part is the juxtaposition of a funny, quirky, childlike character or show and the evil, dark, hidden horror aspects below the surface, being obviously inspired by Dora the Explorer. This is usually done in some form of analog horror or whatever the term is, but I'm not that big of a fan of stuff like Five Nights at Freddy's, Poppy's Playtime, the absolute GOAT that is Garden of Banban, and Amanda the Adventurer is no real exception for me. On the pure gameplay side, this is a puzzle game where you have to finick around with certain things in this spooky attic to progress through the game, finding new tapes and secrets to continue on. I don't want to actually spoil anything here if this is a type of game you are interested in, but in general it is fairly unsettling for a while. Once your initial progress stops, as you're required to solve more esoteric puzzles and make stranger connections, I kind of lost interest to figure things out for myself after having tried a few new things and not really progressing anything further. Obviously, you can just look up a guide for that, which kind of defeats the entire point, or you can keep banging your head against the wall, shambling around the attic, trying new stuff ad nauseum. The slow movement and inexplicable screen tearing, even with VSync or G-Sync on, doesn't really help to make that interesting to me, however. And to me, a game like this just kind of comes off as streamer bait in a way, where the spooky parts seem more intended as reaction bait, but that could just be me with my brain being rot by TikTok. In short, this game just isn't one for me, but it could be one for you. I will therefore give it not quite a red cross on the board as we move on to our next title, Mediterrenea Inferno. This one is even more fitting of the not for me label. Mediterrenea Inferno is a visual novel centered around 3 extremely gay guys who try to reconnect with their drug-fueled nightlife past that was shattered by the COVID pandemic. These three's entire identity seemed to hinge entirely on this lavish nightlife they had and were known for, which was then taken from them due to lockdowns and whatnot. Since this is a visual novel style game, the focus here is obviously the story, but it is presented in a very esoteric and surreal way. The visuals, sounds and characters, as well as the way they talk, is all very strange in general, which isn't helped by what I assume is a little bit of a language barrier, considering this was made by 2 Italian guys. The way the English is written is a bit weird sometimes, but it could just be, the aesthetic of the entire game in general. The themes here are made fairly clear from the start though: wrestling with trauma, uncertainty about the future, uncertainty about the present, uncertainty about the past, struggling with your identity, the whole shebang. It kinda comes off as if it was written by someone who actually struggled a lot during the actual pandemic themselves, and if you're a fan of more experimental narratives, I'm sure this could be right up your alley. But it's not up mine. While I think the visuals are interesting, they kinda give me a headache, though at least the music is quite good and enjoyable. In general, I appreciate what this game is going for, but it's not something that clicks with me, so I won't personally recommend it. If you do feel like wanting to play something like this, absolutely feel free, but this isn't something I would pick up the humble choice in its entirety for, though it might be a hidden gem for the right people, as it has won some narrative awards. It's a cross for me, maybe not for thee. And finally we come to Bravery and Greed, which feels like a co-op focused attempt at emulating Dead Cells a little bit. In Bravery and Greed, you play as one of 4 classes with up to 3 friends and just go through some levels killing bad guys and looting stuff, mainly a lot of money. This feels fine, but playing it solo definitely shows it isn't made with solo in mind. This isn't a bad thing per se, as it is marketed as a co-op game, but it is a little bit annoying if you don't have any friends that are interested in getting the game themselves to play with you, or are not available to play with you locally. At least King of the Castle allows friends to join you through a browser without having to actually buy the games themselves, if they're not available to play with you locally for split-screen co-op, of course. As far as gameplay goes, it's alright. The movement is a bit floaty, the camera movement makes my head spin, the UI is a bit weird, but that might be because it expects 4 people to have their own part of the UI to look at their gear individually on the same screen. Some attacks are a bit weird in terms of hitbox, whatever. Like I said, it does feel Dead Cells inspired, with a similar level layout system, having some portals to jump across the levels, gear that changes up your stuff and stuff like that, though your moveset itself is determined by the class you play as and not by any weapons you pick up. These classes are alright, they feel relatively limited in their abilities, but for a fast-paced brawler like this, especially with 4 people playing at the same time, it's probably good enough. That's the tagline here, really. Good enough. It's not a game I would buy at full price, and I probably won't play it ever again after this video either, at least not on my own. I guess a game like this, as well as a game like King of the Castle, is a way to get you to pester your friends to get the humble choice for themselves as well, as it's definitely not the first time a co-op focused game makes their way into the humble choice lineup. I'll give this one a fat old mid on the board. If you want a game like this to play single player, just get Dead Cells. It's pretty fucking great. And with that bombshell, I guess we have seen all there is on offer this month for the humble choice. Like I said, getting this month's choice is worth it just for Yakuza Like a Dragon or Hi-Fi Rush on their own. with the rest being nice additions to take a look at, or just give them to some friends or do whatever with them, right? As we can see on our little board here, it's been a decent month. There have been better ones before, and definitely worse ones as well, but for $12, we really can't complain here, right? So, if you're interested in either of the two headliners, I would 100% suggest picking up The Choice for sure. Don't forget to use my referral link, by the way, if you want that. And if any of the other games piqued your interest, I also hope you'll pick up The Choice for those too, to give them a try and maybe try something new. The good thing about Choice in general is that in this way, gamers might get into some new stuff and discover some more niche titles, which is always a good thing in my book. We've all seen what AAA studios and big publishers mean for modern gaming lately, so getting to know some indie titles and studios and widening your horizons, so to speak, definitely can't hurt. Thank you so very much for joining me in this Humble Choice batch review. I really hope you enjoyed the video and learned some stuff about the games on offer. Also, as a quick little sneaky announcement at the end here, I've decided to open up both a PayPal account and a Ko-fi page at which you can tip me a few bucks if you feel like it. I decided that, since I hit 500 subscribers recently, it might be a good milestone to open stuff like that up. But if you do feel like my videos are good enough to throw some spare change my way, please only do so if you truly want to. And in case you were wondering, a Patreon or something more robust than just opening up a tip page will be out of the question for the foreseeable future, definitely until I hit at least 1,000 subscribers, because at that point I could actually monetize my videos. In the end, I am still doing this 100% in my free time as a little hobby, so I don't expect anything to come out of this, and I also won't be able to suddenly make 10 times more or 10 times better videos either, so please keep that in mind if you do want to, send $2 my way or whatever. I'll also only mention this once. For the time being at least. I'm not going to make any absolute promises here, but I won't be starting every video from now on with a please support the videos guys, I really need that money, I really do, I really need that money. I'll just mention it once here at the end of this video, I'll pin it in the comments for this video as well, and then keep it on the down low in the description and the channel about page in the future. So I just wanted to mention that in general. Again, I don't expect anything, and you shouldn't feel obligated to support me in any financial way whatsoever, but if you do want to, it's immensely appreciated. So with all of that being said, thank you again for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I also hope to see you again in the next one. Peace out. Darkside Talzian logging off.